Welcome to the April session of the Eureka Whiskey Club. As always, I'm Trevor Tyler, and today I have the extreme honor of being joined by Freddie Johnson, 2018 inductee into the Kentucky Bourbon Hall of Fame. And I am beyond excited to have Freddie on tonight. It's just an extreme honor. And I think a lot of our viewers are familiar with Freddie, but some may not be familiar with Freddie. So, Freddie, I'd love if you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and what your position is at Buffalo Trace Distillery.
Well, I'm a country bumpkin that stumbled upon something that he truly enjoys doing. But my background is a little bit varied. So my background is actually engineering, chemistry, and science. I'm a third direct generation at Buffalo Trace Distillery. And I was fortunate enough to play there as a kid, starting when I was like 5 years old, Trevor. My grandfather was there for like 52 years. He and Colonel Blanton had met on the riverbank behind the distillery as kids. Old Tom Sawyer, Huckleberry Finn kind of a story. They became friends, and they were there at Buffalo Trace together for 52 years. Along comes my dad. My father and Elmer were in the Air Force together. Not knowing it at the time, my father was a civil engineer, and he made landing strips. Elmer was a bombardier, and Elmer's planes landed on my father's landing strips during the war. They were together at Buffalo Trace Distillery for 47 years. What's interesting is Elmer, at 90 years old, became one of only 3 living master distillers to have ever had a whiskey named after him. The other 2 was Booker No with Jim Beam, that was Booker's. And then you had Jimmy Russell with Wild Turkey, Russell Reserve. So Elmer gets that distinction at 90. And my father, at 94 years old, became the only living person to have personally handled every millionth barrel that ever came through Buffalo Trace Distillery since Prohibition. So I was fortunate enough to come back. I promised him I'd be his caregiver. So when you mentioned your connection with AT&T, that was part of the network that I put in place. And at the time we were doing that, my father called me and told me he was terminally ill, and asked me would I keep my promise and come home and be his caregiver. So we got the backbone network in place. I was working with Bell Labs, and at one time my office was up on 6th Avenue in New York at the Network Operations Center. So we did underground military sites, Air Force One, major network switches when football and basketball were changing, like if you watching the game and then we're going to go to the other side of the United States or another part of the world, we would operate the controls to make that happen electronically. And I was just happy as I could be. My father calls and asked me would I keep my promise and come home. And I did. Of all the gifts I've ever given my dad, keeping a promise meant more to him than any other gift I had ever given him. And it changed my life, Trevor. As we talk about these products this evening, you're going to begin to understand why in the documentary Neat, something happened in that documentary, and I went off script, and I'd started talking about the last bottle that I had with my father. And that started where I am today. So it started off, I was just going to work for 1 year. And I got caught up in all this, and I started approaching giving tours at Buffalo Trace like I remember doing them as a kid, telling a story, not bombarding the people with a whole lot of dates and numbers and things that they forgot half of what you would say anyway. But I told a story in a way that you could envision what it must have been like coming back there as a settler, trying to make whiskey and dealing with all the other elements that were involved. And it took off. And more people started to come. For a while, my father would actually come down there with me, and he would tell everybody that I was his son, but I wasn't giving a very good tour today. And he would chuckle and walk and walk off. And they would look like, who is that old man? And I'd have to explain to them that that was my dad, and he would get a kick out of that. And it ended up, a lot of people really enjoyed coming to Buffalo Trace and spending time with me. And ultimately, it ended up I became the VIP team lead for tours at Buffalo Trace. And Steve Akeley, if you've ever heard of him, he also does a podcast. He's out of Indiana. And because of what was happening around here, he actually introduced a petition. And it started circulating on Facebook. I had no idea that it was going on. And someone called me one day and said, have you been out on Facebook? And I said, no. And they said, well, Freddie, you need to go out on Facebook and look at what's going on. There's a petition out about you. I said, I beg your pardon? You know, petitions are never good. You know that, Trevor. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. He said, there's over 2,000 signatures on that petition about you. And I'm like, oh, she's, people on Facebook can be kind and they can also be pretty mean sometimes. And I'm thinking the worst. And I go out there and I see all these signatures of people that I've
No, people mean on Facebook? That's not, that doesn't happen.
Oh, so I figured I've been befriended by, by 2,000 people, and some of the nicest compliments started coming in. And the petition was to have me inducted into the Bourbon Hall of Fame. And it was the first time anything like that had ever happened. And it touched me because it caused me to look at the bottles that we're going to be talking about this evening. It caused me to look at the products differently. And if you can see this, I'm going to show you. Okay. Here's the way it works. The liquid in the bottle, if you think about it, Trevor, it's only a conduit. It is a product that provides you the opportunity to communicate and spend time with someone you truly enjoy being with. And that's the bottom line. And so I tell people all the time, it's not meant to be put up on a shelf and looked at and gazed upon. It's a product that's meant to be shared with friends and family to create memories that last a lot longer than that bottle will. So came back and I started doing that. It took off, and here we are today. So I'm just a happy camper. I'm, as Charlie Pride said in one of his songs of years ago, he said, I'm just me. So what you see is what you get. But that was, came back. I was only going to stay a year. Yeah. I was only going to stay for 1 year, and that was 20 years ago, Trevor. And I'm still having fun.
Well, that's amazing. Is there a little lag on my end here, Freddie?
A little bit, but you're okay now. So
sorry, I'm having the trouble with some internet connection here. So,
but you said sounding great.
Awesome. So obviously it's such an amazing story. And like you said, you were only supposed to be there for 1 year and you ended up there for 20. And then obviously the petition is, it speaks for itself. I mean, you definitely are someone that deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, and just someone that has such a passion for whiskey. And, just it's, I had the pleasure of being on one of your tours back in 2015 when our company went to Buffalo Trace. And I can tell you this, Freddie, that people that I know that work for our company that were there, and people that no longer work for our company that were there, still, when they found out that I was going to be talking to you today, they were very excited, because you make a lasting impression on everyone you meet. And I'm sure you've heard that before, but it's amazing to have you on, and I'm excited for our members to just get just a little bit of your knowledge and your storytelling, because it's definitely something very exciting and a once in a lifetime experience for myself and for our members to have you on here. So you kind of mentioned it a little bit, and your third generation. Your grandfather worked at the distillery, your father worked at the distillery. You came back to keep your promise to your father. Do you have a first memory of the distillery from when you were a kid, and maybe a favorite memory? I know you spent a
Oh,
lot of time at the distillery playing with the barrels and stuff. So I'd love to hear maybe the first thing you can remember about being at the distillery, and then maybe a favorite memory.
so when I tell you this, this is going to blow your mind. So my grandfather, my dad, and I, we used to fish behind the distillery. It was called the dry house. And what they do is they rinse the fermenters and the cookers out. And during this period of time, years ago, you could run that rinse water right on out into the river, and the fish would come up and feed there. So it was an ideal fishing spot. So I'm down underneath the dry house with my dad and my granddad. And as a kid, I'm exploring, and I see this ladder coming down from beneath the building. And so I decide to go experiment. I'd never been into that part of the distillery before. So I go over and I start climbing up the ladder, and the trap door was open. And so I'm like, and I could hear this roaring and tumbling and this mechanical sound. So I climb up the ladder and I stick my head up through the floor. And I'm looking around, and I look like a little groundhog sticking his head out of a hole. And the worker was up there, and he looks down at me like, and he started laughing. And he's like, where in the hell did this little kid come from? Right. And so he says, can I help you? And I said, I'm just looking around. And he said, you're Jimmy's boy, aren't you? And I said, yeah. I said, they're down here fishing. He said, well, come on inside. So I climb on up the ladder and I come inside, and he shows me these big, gigantic tumble dryers where we dry the grain, dry the mash, and make it into livestock feed. And I was amazed at that part of the distillery, because normally I was on the other part where the barrels are being rolled in and filled. And it was kind of like the final part of it. I'd never seen the aftermath of what you actually do with the mash when it comes off the still. And I'm back in there looking around. Well, he's showing me all this stuff, and I'm just as happy as I can be. And my dad and my granddad are worrying, like, where did he go? Is he out in the river somewhere? We can't find him. And I'm up walking around inside the building. And then we go over to the rail, and I look down, and my dad and my granddad are down there. They're looking all around for me. And I'm like, hey, how you doing? Well, that didn't go too well, because I didn't realize I didn't realize how worried they were about me, but I was just having a blast. But it's it catches you. It's contagious. You begin to realize it's more than just the whiskey in a bottle. It's all the other things that go with it. And you start talking to these people that work in these different areas, and they all have stories to tell. And that was the one that it just stuck with me, because of my engineering background, and to see the mechanics and to see how this stuff works. It was just fascinating. Steam locomotives used to come to Buffalo Trace. I got to ride on a steam locomotive with the engineer. Big time, big time. And I think that in the world that we live in today, it's unfortunate that a lot of kids don't get a chance to see practical applications, theories that they're taught in school at an early age. Because once you begin to do that, if you're a doodler, you can then take those theories and you can doodle, especially with laptops and computers today, and you can design things and you create things. And more, the kids of today are creating the destinies of tomorrow. If you think about all these things that these kids are coming up with now, just because of things that they've learned how to do on a computer. So I think that the process that I look at, that I was raised with, goes back to the 17 and 1800s. So the process of making bourbons and whiskeys is still the same as it was in the 17 and 1800s. But here we are today using display panels and modular engineering to create and replicate the same thing the settlers were doing hundreds of years ago. And we still haven't gotten it right. You know, it's kind of funny.
What do you think, from an engineering perspective, what do you think has been like the biggest advancement um, in the whiskey making process over the past, 50 years?
Oh gosh. When I started playing here, I've been very blessed. I've been here with 3 different living master distillers. So when I first started playing around Buffalo Trace, Elmer T. Lee was the master distiller. And Elmer was an engineer. And then Elmer was followed by Gary Gayhart. Gary Gayhart was also an engineer. And Ancient Age and the 10-year-old products are really, those are things that Gary Gayhart had created. And then following Gary is Harlan Wheatley today. All of them were engineers. All of them approached making whiskey differently. The beauty of Harlan Wheatley, our current master distiller, he has 2 engineering degrees. One is in chemical engineering, and the other is in traditional engineering, methods and processes. And the technologies of today, when I talked to Harlan about those kinds of things, Harlan said, the process is still the same. He says, but now we don't have to guess that we're at about the right temperature. We don't have to guess that we've cooled it down to about the right temperature. We don't have to guess that now is the time to add the yeast to produce these flavors, because we can monitor that. And what it does is it helps us to be more efficient. And from a standpoint of continuity, the objective is to be able to replicate the taste profile that your consumers have come to enjoy. So consistency in this process is what technology has allowed us to do. And it's really kind of cool to see now that we've learned that, we've now learned that, well, we can tweak this. We can raise the temperature a little bit and it produces these flavors. We can lower the temperature a little bit. We can produce these flavors. We can put the barrel in a different part of the warehouse, and based on temperature and humidity, the rotation of the earth, sun shining in the window, the amount of moisture around the barrel, you can produce entirely different flavors. So, I mean, I'm in this industry. I'm an old fart, but my heart and my soul is just as young as it ever was for seeing all the stuff that the younger generation is doing with bourbon and whiskey today. So it's refreshing.
What would your grandfather say about all this new technology?
Huh. That's right. Whenever he'd get hit with something that just kind of blew him away, he'd always go, huh. and he'd shake his head. And then my dad would say, well, that's all right. So granddad was, huh. And dad was, well, that's all right. It's just, it's so nice. I mean, to think of what you're doing right now, the podcast, the ability to take a group of folks, and it's almost like, remember in the old days when they had radio and you'd sit around and you would listen to the radio, and mentally your mind was able to envision what some of these things must have been like, walking down the dark street. You could hardly hear anything, and all of a sudden you hear the screech. And and all of a sudden, as a young person, your mind just, and you could visualize those types of things. Well, that's what you do with your broadcast. The person can talk about it, and if we do it like we're doing right now, you get the opportunity to mentally go on that journey. You can visualize it, and it helps you to appreciate these products. So I like the technology, and I like how it's being applied for things like what you're doing this evening.
Yeah, I agree. And I know I'm young, Freddie, but I think you'll get a kick of this. My dad used to make it. He would put on the radio, and I can't remember what station it was here in Southern California, but they would play old radio broadcasts of Dragnet,
Yeah.
and he would make us listen to it when we were kids because he told us, he said, when I was a kid, I didn't have a TV, and this is what we listened to, and it definitely helped with my imagination as a kid. But so I definitely understand what you're saying, even though I'm young. I understand what you're saying.
Oh yeah. So Sergeant Friday and the Shadow Knows, and but the deal is, um, let's try taking that snippet of what we just did, and I'm going to walk you down this, and I'm going to ask you to try this one on. Try to imagine it's the 17 and 1800s. Thomas Jefferson is still the governor of Virginia, and you are out in the middle of nowhere, and you're in a place that is called Fincastle County, Virginia. All right. You are
Okay.
out here because you have been given a grant of 400 acres of land. And all you have to do as a settler is raise 1 acre of grain, and the land becomes yours. So a lot of the settlers coming out here were Scottish, Irish, and Welsh. But what they did was they brought their stills with them. So a skill that they had learned in the mother country, they bring it out here in the middle of nowhere. You're still making rye and barley whiskeys, and you encounter the locals, and they're raising corn. And the Spanish had introduced the Native Americans to corn whiskey. So you start mixing the corn with the rye and the barley whiskeys, and you produce a new tasting whiskey that doesn't even have a name. It's just known as darn good. Ready for this? Watch how history affects all of these pieces. At the same time this is going on, there were two famous French families influential in the development of this territory, in Castle County. One was a general in the Revolution, General Lafayette. Hence, Fayette County, Lexington, Kentucky, is named after him. But the other family is the same family that today owns the French International Banks of Bourbon. It was a Bourbon family. And this territory, believe it or not, went from Fincastle County, Virginia, to Bourbon County, Virginia, in honor of this family. And at the same time this is going on, Trevor, you're making this new sweet tasting whiskey that doesn't have a name, and it becomes referenced as Bourbon County whiskey. Later on, county gets dropped from the name, and it becomes Bourbon whiskey, and Bourbon County, Virginia becomes the Commonwealth of Kentucky as we know it today. It's always been about the hooch. So the settlers start to create it. More and more families come out here. And at one point prior to Prohibition, do you know there were over 2,000 families making whiskey in Kentucky alone? Over
Wow.
2,000. So it's got quite the heritage, but you didn't come by yourself. So you're going to bring people that know how to build barrels. You're going to bring people that know how to make stills. You're going to have to bring somebody that understands fermentation. They have to understand how to build warehouses. So all of a sudden you realize the image that people see of Kentucky in the old days, a bunch of old rough looking guys. They always had guns and dogs and funny looking hats on their head. But guess what? It was the wrong image. The settlers that came out here were architects. They were structural engineers. They were chemists. They were biochemists. They were arborists. They understood the rotation of the earth. They understood the properties of different kinds of wood. So that's why the barrels were always made out of white oak, and the wooden structures that held all the weight were always made out of red oak. You always hear about the white oak. You never hear about the red oak. And the beauty of it, It is a very porous wood. It leaks like a sieve. But guess what? It is very strong, and it is the last choice wood of termites and insects and animals, because when they bite into it, red oak is
Oh,
bitter.
wow.
So they didn't have Orkin and pressure treated wood and Terminix. So here you're out here. If you build your fences and stalls out of white oak. Well, white oak has sugar in it. So your horses, because of their teeth, they sit there and chew all through your fences. So I mean, your livestock is running wild, and you're busy realizing, wait a minute, I can't use white oak to build a barn with because they're chewing up my barn. Isn't that crazy? So you don't write it down. What you do is your
That's crazy.
family
Yeah.
understands. Yeah, so your family understands this. So you keep those secrets within your family. So that's why I like the Bean family. They talk about the multiple generations. Jimmy Russell with his family, Jimmy and Eddie, and now his son, Eddie's son. So what you did was certain trade secrets, you kept them within your family so that you were always value added to the process. So no matter what piece of the pie you had, you were always a part of the team. It was crazy. So the term was called "We Take Care of Our Own." So that's why settlements got created, because every family in the settlement had a piece part to make the settlement work. So it's kind of cool.
No,
Anyway,
that's definitely cool.
yeah. So I get
You
pumped up
gotta
about
keep family secrets is the lesson there, huh?
yeah, yeah. There's always a couple of things there that you that makes it work for you. So
Yeah.
um, we were talking about these kinds of things. This white dog, okay. Uh, some people call it Everclear, Georgia Moon, White Lightning. So on my
Yeah.
dad and my grand, so this is what they used to drink, Trevor. All right. So yeah. So now
No,
you know
absolutely.
why
Yeah.
they. Yeah. So now you know why they went around and kissed the horses late at night. they got full of this stuff here. All right. So here's a little
So
trick. So on my
what's the
dad and
proof
my
on that one,
granddad,
Freddie? That you're
this one 125 proof. So
got it.
this is the recipe for the two products that we're going to taste this evening. Buffalo Trace and Eagle Rare are both from Mash Bill 1. All right. So if you wanted to find out if your whiskey was any good, it's called waking the dog. So what you would do is you would stick your hand underneath the spigot as it came off the still. And I'll just demonstrate this. Is kind of a fun thing. You take the white dog and you pour a little bit into your hand. Now, this does not work with bourbon. It's got to be when it first goes into the barrel. Okay. So this is before it goes
So
into
I
the
couldn't
barrel.
do it with my Buffalo Trace, huh?
Now, it's not going to work because the char and caramelized sugars are going to mask some of the flavors and the aromas. So what you do is you take it and you smell of it, and believe it or not, it will smell soft and buttery. A little bit of corn will come at you. The dog is asleep. Okay, you don't even appreciate how strong the alcohol concentration is until you slap it. You pop your hand like that, and you rub them real briskly together, and then you smell them again. And the alcohol vapors, when you smack your hands, you rupture the water membrane that's encompassing the alcohol molecules. And when you rub your hands like that, it gives them a chance to escape. You smell your hands, and it tells you the concentration of alcohol in the liquid. All right. Then you let them breathe for a moment. Okay. Now, when I say Hillshire, you say corn. All right. Well, when I say Hillshire, you say farm. When I say bourbon, you say corn. Got it? Corn. You smack your hands, you rub them real briskly, and believe it or not, they will smell like corn because it's the dominant grain.
Yeah.
You let them breathe again. So it's layered. So now the alcohol vapors have escaped. The dominant grain, corn, has escaped. You smack them again. You rub them real briskly. Smell them again. Trevor, they will smell like bread, like yeast, like dough. And brewer's yeast, baker's yeast, and distiller's yeast all smell entirely different. I can then let my hands breathe for a little bit, and you'll rub them together. and it will feel like you put a real nice lotion on your hands. And those are the inherent properties of your grains. Oils and fatty acids are inherent with corn and rye. So it's called waking the dog, but that's how moonshiners would check your whiskey before it ever touched their lips. Because if it didn't smell right, I know that you've done something to it. So I'm not going to fool with it. I don't want to suck down tobacco juice and some of these other things that they used to put in their tobacco into their bourbon to give it flavor. Kind of cool.
Like prune juice too, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Prune juice was another one they would put in there. Anything that would give it a little bit of color. They would even put arsenic, and they would run it through a radiator grill. And the reason they ran it through a radiator grill is because the lead would sweeten it up. And that's where the term rot gut came from, because sometimes they would put battery acid in there, things like that. Anything that would give it color and give it a little bit of a bite. That's where the term rot gut came from, because those things would actually rot out the lining of your stomach. But if you got hooked on it, it produced an exceptionally sweet taste when you mixed all this stuff together, and it would end up killing you. So it was true when they said that you would go blind and stuff like that with some of this bad alcohol. That was a true statement. Okay, you went mute. Okay, I can't hear you. Nope. I've lost you.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, you're back.
Okay, sorry, still having some internet issues. No, I think that's why they put the bottle and bond act in place, right?
Very good. So E.H. Taylor is the one who started this. He was tired of all this foolishness, and during that journey down to New Orleans on the river, a lot of these folks would take the cheap whiskey and mix it with the good whiskey, and it would increase their profit margin. And Taylor found out that, that whiskey was not his whiskey hitting New Orleans. So the Bottled and Bond Act actually means that it was made, processed, distilled at the same site during the same season. And when it was bottled, it had to be at least 4 years old and 100 proof. Now, what you just said is significant. A lot of people are paying a large sum of money for a bottle of bourbon. Something new comes out and they think, oh, it's $50. Oh, that's that must be something really good. But all I share with folks is proof and price. If you never remember anything else about what the two of us get to talk about, proof and price are never indications of age or of quality. Proof is just the percent alcohol in the bottle that you're about to pay for. Now, the categories that help you to understand this is if you pick up a bottle of bourbon, look at the label. And if the label, when you read it, says Kentucky Bourbon Whiskey, that's all the label says, Kentucky Bourbon Whiskey, and it tells you the proof. Well, what that means to you is it was made in Kentucky. Bourbon means that the dominant grain is corn, so it's at least 51% corn, and it's a form of whiskey. It's a form of bourbon whiskey, like a Scotch whiskey or an Irish whiskey. It just means that the dominant grain is corn. But if it just says Kentucky Bourbon Whiskey, the whiskey in the bottle is not even 2 years old. So this little weird thing about bourbon is I can take bourbon coming off the still clear, run it through a newly charred oak barrel, because it's got to touch the inside of a newly charred barrel, and bring it right back out. And I can call it bourbon, and it could have been in the barrel for only a day. But I can legally call it bourbon. It's not going to taste very good, but a lot of these bourbons that are out there aren't even 2 years old. Straight on your label means it's at least 2 years old, and bottled and bond means it's at least 4 years old. Okay, so but the bottled and bond means it was all done in the same season. So if I want to make a batch and I want to create some really nice mellow flavors, I may get some from different vintages and marry them together and make a small batch out of it. So that's the difference. Yeah.
All right, we're gonna make a cocktail, Freddie. Is that okay?
Hey, I'm ready to make it. So you
All
have
right, so I
yours.
have kind of everything pre. Yeah, so they say that tell us something. Tell us something about the mint julep. It's originally a breakfast drink, right?
Yeah, it really started. It's become the drink of the Derby now. But it's really a pretty straightforward drink. If you want to talk about it a little bit there, basically simple syrup. He's fixing it up. So tell him what you're doing while you're doing it there, and I'm going to have mine. I've got mine already set up here also. So you got some simple syrup.
Yeah. So just equal parts simple syrup, 1 to 1, and I have about 12 pieces of mint here. I'm just muddling up the mint a little bit. You know, you don't want to tear it. You just want to kind of lightly bruise it just to get the flavors out. And I'm doing this in the simple syrup without the bourbon because if I add too much volume to this, it's going to be harder to break up those oils on the mint. But I want to infuse those mint flavors into the drink. So I'm really infusing the mint flavors into the simple syrup first, and then I'm going to add my bourbon. So I've done that. I'm going to add 2. So really, it's a super simple cocktail: just simple syrup, mint, and whiskey. And I'm going to add my 2 ounces of Buffalo Trace. And Freddie says that Buffalo Trace is the perfect whiskey to make a mint julep with, but I had seen a few things on some comment boards where maybe some people were using 1 ounce of Buffalo Trace and 1 ounce of Eagle Rare, and they quite enjoyed that mixture as well. But I'm going with straight Buffalo Trace. Then I'm going to add some crushed ice to the cocktail. And I'm not going to, I'm just going to slightly give that a stir, kind of bringing the mint leaves up and into the cocktail just so they're not resting on the bottom. And then I'm going to top it off with crushed ice. Nice good mound of crushed ice. I'm going to take my mint. It's got a nice healthy bouquet of mint.
Yes.
And I'm going to just kind of flick it. I don't want to smack it. I don't want to completely bruise it, but I just want to open up those oils. So I'm just flicking the mint, and I'm going to just put it right on top of the drink there. If you can see that. And then I have this fancy duster, this powdered sugar duster.
Oh,
And
my
I'm just going to
word.
slightly tap the side of that. All right. And that is a mint julep. Cheers.
Salute.
So the bourbon is the star, and we just get a little bit of sweetness from the simple syrup, and then obviously that bright, fresh mint. And yeah, these things are dangerous in my opinion because they
Yes.
it's just pretty much bourbon and sugar, but they go down smooth. So breakfast drink, right? Mint julep.
Breakfast, lunch, brunch, afternoon, dinner, cigar, horse racing, all of the above. You know, Trevor, I cannot think of anything that would go any better with this than a candle. And you, for those of you that don't know what's going on with this event this evening, today is Trevor's birthday. And so I have my mint julep and I have the candle. And if you can blow this candle out, that would really be cool. But
all right.
Happy birthday to you. It is in it's appropriate. Bourbon and horse racing go hand in hand. Elmer came up with the idea of the design of the Blanton bottle, and the horse is on top. And it's so appropriate with the Mint Julep because Elmer basically jump-started the industry, and that got us Buffalo Trace and Eagle Rare, and the legacy continues. So salute, happy birthday to you. I'm not going to sing and drive you to drinking, but I do hope that you're enjoying the time that we're spending together.
Freddie, when they said that you were available on my birthday to do this, I don't think I would have agreed to do this with anyone other than you on my birthday. This is it truly, and I'm not joking. It truly, was a treat to do this on my birthday. And thank you very much. We're not done yet though, but I do have some more questions for you if that's okay. And
no, that's fine. The powdered sugar on the top, I'm going to have to try that. That's the first time I've seen someone do it that way with the powdered sugar. So I'm curious about.
It's just this little
and you
tool.
Just tap it in.
Yeah. But you can just use just a normal salt or pepper shaker. This is just for fancy folks like me.
It looks
sure all
nice.
our members are like, what? All our members are probably like, why didn't we get one of those in our box? But speaking of the box, I do want to talk about the Buffalo Trace and the Eagle Rare. We both are barrel picks this month for our members. Can you tell us a little bit about the selection between Buffalo Trace and Eagle Rare? It is the same recipe in grain bill, if I'm not mistaken. But how do barrels get selected to be Buffalo Trace, or barrels selected to be Eagle Rare? Talk to us a little bit about that process, if you don't mind, and then maybe if you have them in front of you, maybe you can talk about one and we can taste it. You can tell us your notes or tasting notes, and then we'll do the same with Buffalo Trace, if that's okay.
Okay, so hopefully everyone has the two products, right?
They should, yes, and water, right? We want everyone to have some water, right?
Excellent. Okay, so when this bourbon boom took off this time, one of the things that started happening at the distillery was we noticed that there was a very subtle shift, and all of a sudden it wasn't just a bunch of older guys coming in. Then we started getting a bunch of middle-aged guys, and then we started getting a bunch of college kids. So the younger generation was starting to intermix, and a lot of them were coming with their fathers, which was really kind of cool. It was we just noticed what was happening, and then all of a sudden it started to become men and women coming in. And that's when we started to look at our tasting process and our procedures, even our barrel picks and the way it was done. And we learned a lot. To make a good bourbon, like at Buffalo Trace, whether it's Buffalo Trace or Eagle Rare, the final selection of the barrels, like when they did the barrel pick, most don't realize that the final selection, this is after it's gone through its chemical acceptance and it's met all the parameters. The final acceptance is a mix of men and women, always a mix of men and women. And if any one of those turns the bottle sideways, that barrel does not get to become Buffalo Trace or Eagle Rare. And what we discovered was men and women smell and taste things differently. And if you really want a truly balanced product, you've got to have both. So that was the first piece. That was an aha moment. The second thing that came about was, if I'm in the habit of drinking wine or craft beers or IPAs, and you start bringing out your bourbons, you're about to take that person from 12 or 14 proof to 80, minimum of 80, all the way up to 145 proof. The unfortunate part, Trevor, is they're going to sip it like they would sip their wine or their beer. And that concentration of alcohol overwhelms them. And it becomes a very unfortunate moment. They're coughing and sputtering and saying it tastes terrible. Everyone else is laughing at them, making fun of them. But in this world that we live in now, culturally, your clients and your customers and your family members are counting on you to guide them through that in a way that they can appreciate this good bottle. And remember the rule that we talked about. So for your folks that are listening in, there's an unspoken rule. As you well know, we've talked about this. The first unspoken rule, there's two. The first unspoken rule is you will never, ever, ever, ever bring out your good stuff with people you don't like. You just don't do it. You won't even tell them that you got it because you don't want to give them any of it. Right? So that's the first unspoken rule. But the second unspoken rule to me is the funniest of all. If I do bring it out and I tell you I'm going to bring it out, before I pour you that drink, you have to listen to what I went through to get it. I had to stand in line for 3 days. I had to know somebody that knew somebody. Oh, yeah. So they always have a story to tell with a good bottle of bourbon. Okay. So I tell people all the time, never lose sight of why you brought it out. Now, let's go on this journey and let's say we're bringing out our Buffalo Trace. Whenever you bring out your bourbon with friends and family, never lose sight of why you brought it out. Okay. And here's where the water comes in. Water is your friend. And water will help everyone navigate through this. And even if you've been sipping on whiskey and doing a number of tastings, the term for this is called acclimation. And I spent time with Harlan Wheatley to understand this. And Drew Mabel is our master blender. And we've talked about this, and you'll hear us talking about water all the time. So the way this works is it's kind of an interesting thing. If they have their glass, okay, we have little covers on ours. So what we do is we'll take it and we'll just basically, if you can see this, we got the cap on it and we just kind of swirl it around in there. And as you do that, you get a chance to notice how it's coating the inside of the glass. And here's a heads up for you. The lower the proof of your bourbon coming off the still, the more pronounced the coating will be on the inside of your glass, because you're able to bring with it some of the natural properties of the grain. So that's the first thing you're gonna do is you do that, and a good bourbon will make legs just like a good wine, but the lower the proof off the still and the longer it's been in the barrel, it will take longer for the legs to break. So you get a coating, and then gradually you start to see the legs forming on the sides. All right. First thing. The second thing, when you've done that, you've increased the surface area, and it allows the volatiles, especially the design of a Glencairn glass, it's designed to capture the volatiles and bring them up into the chimney so that it focuses those vapors. All right. Now, here's where the water comes in. Never, ever, when somebody gives you a really good bourbon, never, ever, ever take your mixer, your water, whatever you're using, and dump it into the drink. Never, ever do that if it's a bourbon or a product that you're not even familiar with. It's the equivalent of a chef at a real nice restaurant serving you your steak and asking you to try it before they walk away. So if you dump your water in there or immediately grab an ice cube and throw in there, what you're telling that person is, I really don't care too much about your whiskey, because I've already, it's equivalent to dumping ketchup or steak sauce on the steak in front of the chef. It's an insult. So the way you do this is, I don't know the right dilution. or whether or not I even need to dilute this product. So what you do is this. You take a sip of water first. They call this cleansing your palate. I call it rinsing out your mouth. Okay? So take a swig of water. Now watch how this works. You're not going to drink this bourbon. You're going to become acclimated to it. You're going to encounter this bourbon. And what you're going to do is you're going to take the glass, and all I want you to do is splash it up against your lips. So just take it and just splash it up against your lips. Just bump the bourbon up against your lips. You will instinctively stick out your tongue and taste it. You just do it automatically. And the other thing you'll do is you'll stick your tongue back out again, and you'll notice two things. The first thing you'll notice is when you did that, it made the tip of your tongue tingle a little bit. That tells you the spiciness and the alcohol concentration. And when you lick your lips, it tells you the viscosity. So it's very light on the lips. Okay, you get a little bit of heat. Why is that important? Buffalo Trace comes from the middle floors of the warehouse. And on the middle floors of the warehouse, it's influenced by the temperature fluctuations. We get 20 to 30 degree temperature swings in Kentucky. So that warming up and cooling down on the middle floors creates that movement in and out of the wood. And tannin in early European days meant the relationship of the spirit to the wood. So you hear about tannins all the time, but the essence of it all is it tells you about that relationship that the spirit had with the wood while it was in the barrel. Whether it's a cognac, a bourbon, or a whiskey, if the barrel was in a place and it sat there for an extended period of time that it was real hot, when you nose your bourbons, you ever notice this? And I will show you, we're going to do this with the Eagle Rare and Buffalo Trace. Your nose can tell you whether or not that barrel was exposed to heat. All right, now, you ready? We're going on a journey, Trevor. This time, you're going to take a sip of water, and I want you to hold the water in your mouth this time. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to dilute the alcohol down, and you're going to be able to get the subtle nuances of this Buffalo Trace without the alcohol being the dominant factor. So with the water in your mouth, take another swig of your Buffalo Trace and roll it around on your tongue for a little bit, and then take gentle swallows. Watch this. And there it is. You get the punch of the rye, but wait a minute. I've got a little bit of oak. I got a little bit of char coming at me, a little bit of corn. Well, wait a minute. As I start to swallow, the spiciness and the heat are gone, and the finish is unbelievably smooth. So in the industry, that's known as a balanced bourbon. It means that it was exposed to temperature fluctuations, but it wasn't sitting in that environment for so long that the heat became the dominant factor. Those are the bourbons that when you swallow, they just burn all the way down the inside of your throat. You got that? Now watch this, because we're going to have some fun with this. I want you to now get your Eagle Rare. And if you do the same thing with the Eagle Rare that you did with the Buffalo Trace, and you take your glass and swirl it around, notice something interesting. The Eagle Rare coats, you can see it coating the inside of your glass, but you have to watch it. And it takes longer for the legs to form. Now it looks almost like a cognac inside your glass. And very, very slowly, the legs will start to form, and it'll start to break and come down, and you'll notice how thick they are in there. It's a very, very slow process. And what that means to you as someone that's about to drink this, it says, okay, the mouthfeel, the viscosity on this one is going to be much more pronounced than it was on the Buffalo Trace. Now, even though they're the same recipe, the same mash bill, they went into the barrel at the same proof. The only difference is Buffalo Trace set on the middle floors and Eagle Rare set down below it. So barrels in a warehouse are just like real estate. Location, location, location. Now, you ready? Let's do this thing with the Eagle Rare. Sip of the water first. Get rid of the Buffalo Trace. Now let's take a sip of let's take the Eagle Rare and we're going to bump it up against our lips, just like we did the Buffalo Trace. Just splash it up against your lips. The first thing you'll notice right off the bat, wait a minute. They're both 90 proof, but I don't have that spiciness on the tip of my tongue. It's sweet. And when I notice my lips feel like I've got a little bit of a coating on them. It's a softer, smoother feel to my lips. You ready for this? You're now acclimated. And now, even though they're both 90 proof, let's take a sip of water, and this time hold the water in your mouth and take a swig of your Eagle Rare with the water in your mouth, and watch what happens this time. Oh my. Did you notice? You can just feel it, whoosh. You can feel it coating the inside of your mouth. There's no oak, there's no char, there's no heat. Now all of a sudden your mouth is watering and you got these sweet caramel toffee notes coming at you. The finish is unbelievably smooth, but it lingers. Your mouth continues to water and you're getting all these soft, subtle nuances. And, you know, a lot of people will talk about they get toffee, they get all these other crazy. I try not to tell people what they should taste. I go by mouthfeel. I like the way flavors linger. I've got a number of different things that remind me of my childhood. And I tell people, don't be influenced by somebody telling you what you should taste. Go by what you feel comfortable with as it relates to you. And I'm going to show you how this works, Trevor. This is so cool. A lot of people that start fooling around with bourbon will tell you, oh, I can't tell the difference between one and the other. All whiskey is the same. Well, let's just see. I call this rapid fire. And if we had 4 different products here, I'll show you how cool this is. So what we're going to do is you're going to take your Buffalo Trace neat in one hand and your Eagle Rare neat in the other. So put both glasses in your hand. Right? Got both glasses. Now just swirl them around a little bit and nose them. And the first thing you'll notice is, wait a minute, there is a difference. Look at this. I smell the Buffalo Trace. I smell the spiciness. All right. And I go to the Eagle Rare and it's soft and sweet. It's almost like a candy. Now, watch this. We're going to do the Buffalo Trace first. Hold the 2 glasses. And we're going to take a sip of the Buffalo Trace. And then we're going to come right back with a sip of the Eagle Rare. So take one, Buffalo Trace first. Now, pick up the Eagle Rare. Take a swig of it right behind it. Just come right behind it with the Eagle Rare. Well, I be darned. All that heat, all that spiciness, and you can see just between these two. And if we had Eagle Rare 17 or the Double Eagle 20 sitting right over here, it would be even softer and richer than the Eagle Rare 10-year-old.
Yeah, you know, if you just have that lying around, right? If you just have Eagle Rare 17 or a Double Eagle Rare 20 lying around, you know, you can see the difference.
I had one person that was like, they said, well, Freddie, we would like to taste all of these. And I said, well, so would I. So would I. But doing what you're doing, I tell people all the time, if you have friends and family over and you want to have some fun, it doesn't take very much to do it, as you can see. It doesn't take very much to do this. But you can do a flight and you can have a wheated bourbon, a good wheated bourbon, a rye recipe bourbon like a Buffalo Trace or an Eagle Rare, and then you can have a high rye like a Blanton's or an Elmer T. Lee, and then you can have a straight rye and just have those 4 products in small amounts and let them taste. And you start with the Weller. Always start with your wheated bourbons first and progress through to your ryes. And if you do it that way, they can appreciate the migration of flavors. But if you start with the rye and a higher proof, they will never, ever get the subtle flavors and the sweet flavors that you have in your lower proof or your wheated bourbons because your palate will have been scorched. And once that happens, you're just wasting your time with these others. But if you walk them through there, that will help them to determine maybe, just maybe, I can take one little piece of ice and drop down in that glass and swirl it around and take a taste. Oh my. I begin to appreciate why somebody says, I like my bourbon on the rocks. Because what that piece of ice does, it's the human body is amazing. Yet, check it out. Drop that piece of ice down into your Eagle Rare, swirl it around a little bit, and then take a sip. And you will notice just in that brief moment, it has changed the taste profile. And so what actually happens is this. It's so crazy. Most people don't realize the ideal temperature of serving your bourbon is actually the same temperature that you're supposed to serve your wine at, and that's 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And that for some strange reason, at 60 degrees Fahrenheit, it concentrates the alcohol molecules. So as you chill your bourbon down, the alcohol molecules contract, and it allows the subtle sweet flavors to come to the forefront. Here's where it's crazy. When you put that drink into your mouth, the inside temperature of your mouth, you ready for this? On the top of your tongue is 93 degrees. And what actually happens is the heart starts pumping blood to your tongue to warm it back up to 93 degrees. It's called the lingual artery. And what it does is that's why they tell you to roll the bourbon around in your mouth is the heart is pumping blood to your tongue and it gradually warms it up. And the enzymes get a chance to break those solids and those subtle nuances down. A trick for you is if somebody is telling you that they're serving you an uncut, unfiltered, barrel-proof bourbon. You hear this all. That's the latest craze going now is full-proof and uncut, unfiltered, barrel-proof. Here's your little trick. Because sometimes people will they'll put something, I'm not saying who, but sometimes people will put something else in the bottle just to keep from giving you the good stuff. And oh yeah, they give you that stag bottle, but they got something else in there. Your little simple trick is this. All you have to do, put you some ice in that glass of uncut, unfiltered, barrel-proof bourbon, and you swirl it around like that. And guess what should happen? It should turn cloudy. It's called a chill haze. That's your indication that you're truly enjoying an uncut, unfiltered, barrel-proof bourbon. And what it is, Trevor, is it's like baking drippings when you cook like a steak or a piece of meat on the skillet, and the oil drippings are left behind. When you first pull the steak out, the oil drippings are clear, okay? But as they cool down, they solidify. And that's why uncut, unfiltered, barrel-proof, huh? Go ahead.
It's the proteins, right? They're
there.
What I'm looking for. The proteins in the oil are they're clinging to each other as they cool down.
Right. They start to congeal and coagulate, and they start to lump together. And as it cools down, they thicken up. And so what happens is, and that's what actually happens inside that glass when you chill it down. The oils and fatty acids, the properties of the saps and rosins and the caramelized sugars start to solidify, and you can actually see them. And when you see that, it tells you that when you take a sip of that product, it will actually open up in your mouth. I mean, just you would get all kinds of flavors. But that's your heads up. It's called a chill haze. And if you want to find out if you got a really good bourbon that came off the still at a lower proof, take your bottle and put it in the fridge or in the freezer and leave it for a couple of hours. And if it comes out just as clear as it went in, basically they filtered out most of the stuff. But if it goes in clear and it comes out, right. So if it goes in clear and it comes out milky looking, that tells you that you've truly got an uncut, unfiltered, barrel-proof bourbon. just a little trick. So anyway,
It's great.
so many things. So many.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hey, Freddie. We do want to take some questions from the audience, and then I do want to ask one more question of you. So apologize for my hand here. I'm doing this from my phone since I had bad internet. So just looking at the chat, seeing a couple questions from the audience. Everyone is very thankful to hear from you tonight. Someone wants to know when tours are starting back up again at Buffalo Trace. I believe they already have.
Are,
right?
Oh Lord, yes. So we started the 1st of July. We had already had during the month of March, right before we shut down, during the month of March, we had over 20,000 visitors. We shut back down. 1st of July, we opened back up, and our numbers are already higher. Even though we have COVID restrictions, our number of visitors and tourists are greater than they were prior to COVID. So we've upped our, because the restrictions have been lightened, we do 10-person tours. They're all complimentary. You get a complimentary tasting at the end. And what we've done is we've increased the number of tour guides, and we've created basically private tasting. We call them paddocks, like you would have if you went to a thoroughbred horse farm. So in your paddock, you have separate areas where the folks can come in. And once we come in there, and basically you go through sanitizing your hands, we close the doors, and you're able to take your mask off in that room with those folks. The tour guide has to keep their mask on, and we're behind a shield. But we walk you through a tasting. And our numbers are actually higher now than they were prior to COVID. Even with all these restrictions, our numbers are still, I think Matt just told us we're running about almost 15% higher than we were prior to COVID. And that's with reservations. So our reservation system, basically, when we release it 1 month prior to the month that you're making your reservation. And within the first couple of days, it's already booked up. And we're still trying to come up with more ways of giving tours, but it's exploded. We've expanded the gift shop. They did you have to come back and see us again. So it's a $1.2 billion expansion. We've increased the size of the gift shop. We've more than doubled the area for our tastings and events. We've doubled the size of the gift shop itself. Number of different products in there. You can go online and see a lot of the products that we carry in the gift shop. We have 5 different tours now, and if they lower the restrictions a little bit more, we will be able to take you back up on the farm and back up around where the stills and the fermenters are, and you get a chance to see the new warehouses that are being built. They are 58,800 barrels in each one, and we're building a new warehouse every 4 months. It's amazing. So you got to come see us.
That's amazing. 2 more questions for you, Freddie, and then I'd love for you to tell us a story to end the call. The first question I have is, and probably a hard question for you to answer, is do you have a favorite whiskey, and what is your favorite whiskey cocktail? Okay. Other than the delicious mint julep that we made tonight.
All right. So the first, in response to this, whoever asked that question, Trevor, my favorite bourbon will be the one that they buy. If it's a Buffalo Trace, that will be my favorite. Do you like this one, Freddie? Oh, yes, that's one of my favorites if you're buying. Okay. But my 2 favorite go-to bourbons, believe it or not, are Eagle Rare. Okay, you can see that one. Eagle Rare and Weller 12. We have discovered that somewhere between 8 and 12, no more than 15 years of bourbon on the lower levels of the warehouse tend to produce the smoother, softer bourbons that linger on your palate. So that's where I'm at. Eagle Rare and Weller 12 are my two favorite bourbons. My favorite cocktail, uh, I'm kind of like playing around with an old fashioned, but um, I really like bourbon. But I have this crazy, every person has this little weird bug that something they do that's, they call it eccentric. I just call it darn good. And here's what I do. I will take my, it's the Stag that I like, and I also like to do it with the Weller 12. And what I do is I chill it down and I pour it into the equivalent of, it would be a glass like this, but what I'm going to do is I'm fill it like maybe 3/4 fill with the bourbon. And I top it off with, I use either, now I use Freddie's ginger ale, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with this little fella. So this is the latest thing out. So I'll take my Freddie's ginger ale
The root
and
beer
I'll
is
pop. Huh?
root beer is delicious as well.
Yeah, the root beer is my. That's the
I said
root beer
Freddie's
is the
root
one
beer is
that I
delicious
do
as
with
well.
the bourbon cream. Okay.
Ah,
So what I do is, but I pour it in there until I just start to see the little bubbles coming up. I telling me that it's breathing. The carbonation is down in there. And Trevor, what I shouldn't tell people I do this because my daughter gets on me all the time. But I sip it like a drambuie, right? Because everything is nice and cold. And I enjoy a cigar every now and then. And so what I do is I take a puff of this cigar and I sip this concoction that I've created. And I let it kind of like roll around in my mouth. And you get the smoky essence of like a really old Scotch or an Irish whiskey and that. And it's just a nice smoky flavor that enhances the sweetness and reminds me of when I was a kid with my great grand. It's crazy. So what happened was my grandfather, my great grandfather, Papa George, when I would go visit him, he had this old leather chair. He had a smoke stand. He smoked a pipe, but he liked these. If you've ever seen them, they're circus peanuts. They look like a peanut. They're orange in color, and he had them in a dish. And whenever I would come to visit him, I looked for this candy dish. And I was just tall enough that my nose was right up on the edge of his smoke stand, which was made out of mahogany. It was a mahogany stand. So I had the leather, I had the mahogany, I had the smoky uh, fragrance from his pipe, and I had the sweet flavors of the candy. And when I do this, I just go into my zone and I think back on how I relate to bourbons and whiskeys. And I tell people all the time, make it make it relate to something that you remember and what it reminds you of. And it takes you on a nice little journey. And I just a lot of times I just sip it and smoke on the cigar by myself. Uh, it's it's just my zone. It's my way of finding a little peace in this crazy world that we live in. So when my buddies come by and I'm sitting out on the porch and they see me with this glass and a cigar in my hand, they just toot the horn because they know I don't want to be bothered. So they'll toot the horn, hey, Freddie, and they'll drive on off. And then they'll come back and see me later. But it's like, I've had enough of this world for a while. Let me enjoy my smoke and a good drink of bourbon. Um,
that's the
the
life.
story. Yeah. Now, the story. What drove me to all this, Trevor? We had talked about this before, and I'm gonna end on this note. Um, I came back to take care of my dad, and I made a commitment to my father that I didn't understand. Okay, so this Freddie's root beer, we'll talk about how that fits into all of this in a minute. But here's the deal: I made a commitment that I would be his caregiver, and I didn't understand my own promise to my own father. And what had happened was this: because he was terminally ill, when I came back, we started his treatments. And the chemo and the radiation and the medications that he was taking changed his sense of smell and taste. And I share this with people all the time because it's so important. My father was so happy that I came back to be with him that every evening that I came in, that he wasn't able to come down to the distillery, no matter when I came in, he would say, "All right, let's do another toast to the Almighty of another day on this earth together." Okay, Dad. So I pour a drink. Trevor, one evening I came in, and his favorite bourbon was George T. Stagg, Uncut Unfiltered, the antique collection. That was by far his favorite drink. He and Elmer and all of them had chosen that at a special event, and it became the world whiskey of the year. I pour him a drink, and I give it to my dad. He takes the glass, he brings it up to his nose, and he says, "Well, what are we drinking this evening, Freddie?" And I realized, Trevor, my father did not recognize his own favorite bourbon. And I said, "Dad," I said, "this is one of your favorites." He took a taste of it. And he made that Mr. Yuck face. He says, "Freddie, I can't drink this one." And I said, "Dad, it's one of your favorites." He said, "Freddie, I'm sorry." He said, "I can't drink it." Now, here's how this gets crazy. I had discovered that he had gotten picky with his food. And so I started playing with things. And I would take, of all things, Diet Pepsi and mix it with his tea. And he would take a big gulp of this mixture. And Trevor, he would just cram the food into his mouth and he would eat it. And I told the oncologist she was surprised. She said, "Freddie, your father's gaining weight." And I told her what I was doing. And she says, "I wish that more people did that." And she said, what you stumbled upon was that mixture of Diet Pepsi and his tea created a chemical composition, and it neutralized the metallic taste that you get with the chemo and the radiation treatment. So that's why people stop eating, and it changes your sense of smell and taste. And what that combination did was it neutralized that, and he could stick the food into his mouth and he would eat. So being the wise young man that I am, I said, "Here, Dad, give me your glass back." I said, "Let me make you another drink." So I take his glass. Trevor, I go into the other room. I dump a bunch of Diet Pepsi in there, throw some ice in there with it, stir it around, and I bring it back to my father. And I said, "Here, Dad, try this one. See if you like this one better." He gets it up to his nose. He smells. He smiles. He takes a sip of it, and he says, "Freddie, I can drink this one." He was all happy. "I can drink this one." I looked at my father and I said, "Dad, it's the same hooch." I said, "All I did was I dumped some Diet Pepsi in it and put in a little ice." I will never forget what my father said to me. Trevor, he looked at me and he says, "It doesn't matter, son." It just took me by surprise. I said, "I beg your pardon?" He said, "Freddie, it doesn't matter what you mixed it with." He said, "What's important? I get to have another drink with you. That's what's important." He said, "So the next time you're down at the distillery walking around with visitors," he says, "look beyond the obvious. The obvious is it's an old distillery, but look beyond the obvious. And when you look in the windows, you'll see all those barrels stacked inside of the building." He said, "And it will become obvious to you. There will always be old barrels and bottles of whiskey." He said, "But here we sit. We're the fragile piece of this whole thing." He says, "Because we're not going to always be on this earth together." He said, "So if you are blessed enough to have a good bottle of bourbon and you bring it out with friends and family," he said, "make a memory. Don't worry about how your friends drink it." He said, "make a happy memory." He said, "Because some of your friends will have medical baggage and they're just not comfortable letting people know what they're struggling with." and maybe a little Diet Pepsi in with that Eagle Rare will allow them to enjoy that drink with you. And you don't have to worry about how they drink it. What you just need to know is they got to have the drink. So I share that with you and your members and with the folks on the podcast. It's all about the moment and make it a happy moment. So, Trevor, I'm just thrilled that you allowed me to come and spend time with you, and I hope that what we've talked about here kind of captures your birthday, and I hope that you have some friends that you're going to bring out your good bottle with. And I tell people now, sign the bottle and date it. So whoever drinks from that bottle with you when you do a toast, sign it and date it. And that becomes your memory moment that long after the bottle is gone, the date and the signatures on that bottle will let you know who you shared that moment with. It's kind of cool. Salute, my friend.
That's great, Freddie. I think we could probably spend another 40 minutes here talking, but I know it's late for you, and I know how special this was for our members. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions. I can't thank you enough. This was definitely a birthday treat for me, and I look forward to the day, hopefully soon, where I can make my way out to Kentucky to go on another tour with you before you retire.
Absolutely. So we'll take you back to a place. It's called The Last Drop. That's the latest thing that we've just published. We just did a release of some bottles that came out of there. They sold for $4,600 a bottle. But we created a refrigerator unit, and we're putting some of these barrels in there. And we think that 50 years from now, we will give you a bourbon that's even better than the Double Eagle coming out of there. So look forward to you coming to see us.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Freddie. Thank you to our members, and I hope everyone has a good weekend. And next month is our Blanton's barrel pick, which we're super excited about. And again, thank you so much, Freddie. Have a good night, and cheers.
Salute. All right. I guess we should do your Mint Julep as the final finale here. Happy birthday, Trevor. May you have many more.
Thank you, Freddie. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.